They thought we were the barbarians. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Council had dismissed humanity as crude upstarts who stumbled into space travel through luck rather than wisdom. They laughed at our simple solutions to complex problems, mocked our tendency to help species that couldn't help themselves, and rolled their countless eyes at our stubborn refusal to follow civilized protocols. But, when the Devourer fleet emerged from the void between galaxies, ships the size of moons, consuming entire star systems to fuel their expansion, the Council's laughter died in their throats. Their advanced mathematics couldn't calculate a solution. Their perfect strategies crumbled against an enemy that didn't follow the rules of civilized warfare. That's when they came crawling to the barbarians they'd spent centuries belittling. What the Council didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength had never been our technology or our numbers. It was our ability to walk away from those who never valued us in the first place. And, sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let someone realize what they've lost, when it's already too late to get it back. This is the story of the day the galaxy learned that respect isn't given freely, and second chances aren't guaranteed even when the fate of civilization hangs in the balance. Ambassador Sarah Chen straightened her shoulders as the massive doors to the Galactic Council chamber hissed open. The sound echoed through the vast space like a dying breath, which seemed fitting given what she was about to witness. 300 years of diplomatic relations were about to come to an end, and she was the one who would deliver the final words. The chamber itself was a testament to alien arrogance. Towering crystalline spires stretched toward a dome that showed the swirling nebulae of the galaxy's core. Thousands of seats arranged in concentric circles housed representatives from over 400 species, each one believing themselves superior to the crude humans who had somehow stumbled their way to the stars. At the center of it all sat the High Arbiters, the 5 most enlightened species who had guided galactic civilization for millennia. The Veltar with their flowing tentacles and eyes that could see across multiple dimensions. The crystalline Zethai whose bodies sang with harmonic frequencies that could shatter mountains. The gaseous Ethmorai who existed as living clouds of sentient plasma. The insectoid Krixtal whose hive minds could process millions of calculations simultaneously. And, finally, the towering Yildan, whose 4 arms and 3 heads made them natural diplomats and strategists. Sarah had stood in this chamber countless times over her 15-year career, representing humanity's interests while enduring their condescension. Today would be different. Today, she wasn't here to ask for anything. The Veltar Arbiter, flowing through cosmic winds, raised one of its translucent appendages. The human delegation may approach, it announced, its voice carrying the musical quality that all Veltar possessed. We understand you wish to address the Council regarding the current situation. Current situation. Sarah almost laughed at the euphemism. The Devourer fleet had already consumed 12 star systems on the galaxy's outer rim. Entire civilizations had been stripped down to their component atoms, converted into fuel for the massive ships that moved through space like living cancer. The most advanced military forces in the galaxy had thrown everything they had at the invaders, only to watch their vessels disappear into the seemingly endless maws of the Devourer ships. Sarah walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps clicking against the polished stone floor. She could feel thousands of alien eyes upon her, some filled with curiosity, others with barely concealed disgust. The humans had never been popular in the Council. Too aggressive, too emotional, too unpredictable. They solved problems with brute force rather than elegant solutions. They helped species that couldn't help themselves instead of letting natural selection take its course. They asked uncomfortable questions about the Council's decisions and had the audacity to disagree with beings far older and wiser than themselves. Honorable Arbiters, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics, I come before you today not to request aid, but to inform you of a decision that the Human Federation has reached after careful consideration. The Zethai Arbiter's crystalline form chimed softly, a sound that translated roughly to amusement. Indeed? And what momentous decision have the humans reached? Perhaps you wish to finally accept our guidance in military matters? Your species' tendency toward crude tactics has been apparent in recent engagements. A ripple of what passed for laughter among the various species echoed through the chamber. Sarah had expected this. For 3 centuries, the Council had treated humanity like a child who had wandered into an adult conversation. When human ships used kinetic weapons instead of elegant energy arrays, they were mocked for their simplicity. When human soldiers chose direct assault over complex strategies, they were criticized for their brutality. When human diplomats spoke plainly instead of wrapping their words in layers of meaning, they were dismissed as unsophisticated. The Human Federation withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately, Sarah announced, her words cutting through the alien chatter like a blade. All human ships, personnel, and resources are hereby recalled to human space. We will no longer participate in Council operations, accept Council authority, or provide assistance to Council member species. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the Ethmorai, who existed as constantly shifting clouds of gas, seemed to still their movements. Sarah could feel the weight of their collective shock pressing against her. The Yuldan Arbiter, wisdom of three minds, leaned forward on its massive frame. When it spoke, all three of its heads moved in unison. This is unexpected. Surely the humans do not mean to abandon their allies in this time of crisis? Allies? Sarah's voice carried a note of steel that made several nearby representatives shift uncomfortably. With respect, Arbiter, when have we ever been treated as allies? When human scientists proposed new technologies, they were dismissed as crude. When human military leaders suggested tactics that had proven successful, they were overruled by more experienced commanders. When human colonies were attacked by raiders, we were told that such incidents were learning experiences that would help us mature as a species. The Crixtal Arbiter's antennae twitched in what Sarah recognized as agitation. Its voice carried the characteristic buzzing undertone of its species. The humans exaggerate. The Council has always valued their unique perspective. Unique perspective, Sarah repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Is that what you called it when Captain Morrison suggested using converted cargo ships as ram vessels against pirate Lord Vashkar's fleet? You laughed at the idea. Called it wasteful and barbaric. Yet when Commander Zilrath of the Veltar implemented the exact same strategy 6 months later, it was hailed as brilliant tactical innovation. She could see the uncomfortable shifting among the arbiters. The incident she referenced was well documented, as were dozens of others like it. Humanity's contributions to galactic civilization had been consistently minimized, stolen, or outright dismissed. When the plague of living metal infected 17 worlds in the outer territories, Sarah continued, human medical researchers identified the cure within weeks. But their findings were rejected because they hadn't followed proper Council protocols for xenobiological research. How many millions died while the Council's own scientists took 2 years to reach the same conclusion through proper channels? The Veltar Arbiter's tentacles writhed in clear discomfort. The protocols exist to ensure safety and, when the Stellar Engineering Corps needed volunteers for the Titan Station construction project, Sarah interrupted, humans provided 60% of the workforce. We lost over 3,000 people building that station. Yet when it was completed, human contributions were relegated to a footnote in the official reports. The Zephi claimed credit for the innovative design that was actually proposed by human engineer Lisa Park. She turned slowly, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. For 3 centuries, we have been the galaxy's workhorses. We fought your battles, built your stations, died for your causes, and solved your problems. In return, we've received condescension, mockery, and the privilege of being tolerated at your table. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, their words overlapping in a cacophony of indignation. How dare the humans make such accusations? They were being dramatic, emotional, typical of their species' immaturity. Sarah waited for the noise to die down before continuing. But, perhaps the most telling incident occurred just 6 months ago, when humanity requested permission to establish a research colony in the Kepler 442 system. The request was denied because the Galactic Archaeological Society claimed the system held significant historical value. When we investigated further, we discovered that 3 Council species had already filed claims for mining rights in the same system. Historical value, it seemed, was less important than profit margins. The silence returned, heavier than before. That particular incident had caused significant embarrassment for the Council when human journalists had exposed the corruption involved. So no, Sarah said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber, we do not abandon our allies. We simply recognize that we never had any allies in this chamber to begin with. The Yildan Arbiter's three heads conferred with each other in rapid, hushed tones before addressing Sarah again. Even if the humans have grievances, surely they understand that this crisis affects the entire galaxy. The Devourer fleet threatens all sentient life. This is not the time for political maneuvering. Sarah almost laughed at the casual dismissal of 3 centuries of systematic discrimination as mere political maneuvering, but she maintained her composure. You're absolutely right, Arbiter. This crisis does threaten all sentient life. Which is why it's so unfortunate that the Council has spent so much time and energy ensuring that humanity feels unwelcome in galactic civilization. She reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small data crystal, holding it up for all to see. This contains detailed tactical analyses of every engagement with the Devourer fleet, compiled by human military intelligence. It includes potential weaknesses in their ship designs, patterns in their movement and targeting priorities, and several strategic recommendations that might prove useful in future engagements. The chamber fell silent again, but this time Sarah could sense a different quality to the quiet. Hope, perhaps, or desperate curiosity. 3 weeks ago, she continued, this data was submitted to the Council Military Committee for review. General Harrison personally presented our findings to a gathering of the finest military minds in the galaxy. She paused, letting the tension build. The response was, and I quote from the official minutes, typical human oversimplification of complex tactical situations. She placed the crystal on the speaker's podium and stepped back. The human analysis suggested that the Devourer ships have a critical vulnerability in their energy distribution networks. Our recommendation was to coordinate simultaneous strikes against multiple ships using a specific pattern of gravitometric weapons. The committee dismissed this as crude thinking that fails to account for the sophisticated nature of the enemy. The Crixtal Arbiter's buzzing grew more agitated. If the humans have information that could help, Sarah corrected. We had information that could help. Information that was rejected by the very people now facing extinction because of their own arrogance. She looked around the chamber one more time, taking in the faces of beings who had spent centuries treating her species like an embarrassing relative at a family gathering. The Human Federation has decided that we will face whatever comes next on our own terms, in our own space, using our own methods. We will not waste more lives trying to save people who have made it clear that our lives have no value. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices carried a note of panic. Species that had never given humanity a second thought suddenly realized what they were losing. The humans weren't just the galaxy's workhorses, they were the ones who fixed problems that others couldn't solve. They were the ones who volunteered for the dangerous jobs, who threw themselves into impossible situations, who somehow found solutions when everyone else had given up. Sarah turned and began walking toward the exit, her mission complete. Behind her, she could hear the arbiters calling for order, trying to regain control of the situation. Representatives were shouting questions, demands, threats, and pleas all at once. As she reached the massive doors, the Veltar arbiter's voice rose above the chaos. Ambassador Chen. Surely humanity does not mean to abandon the galaxy in its darkest hour? Sarah paused at the threshold and looked back one final time. The chamber that had always seemed so imposing now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the absence of hope. Arbiter, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the distance, humanity learned long ago that you can't abandon people who never wanted you there in the first place. The doors closed behind her with a sound like the end of an era. In the corridor beyond, her aide Marcus was waiting with a concerned expression. How did they take it? He asked. Sarah considered the question as they walked toward the human embassy's shuttle bay. Behind them, she could still hear the muffled sounds of chaos from the council chamber. About as well as expected, she replied. Though I think some of them are finally beginning to understand what they're losing. As their shuttle lifted off from the council's primary station, Sarah looked back at the massive structure that had been the center of galactic civilization for thousands of years. Somewhere in that maze of corridors and chambers, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were finally learning a lesson that humanity had tried to teach them for 3 centuries. Respect, once lost, is nearly impossible to regain. And, sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from those who never valued what you brought to their table. The shuttle turned toward human space, leaving behind 3 centuries of thankless service and unrequited loyalty. What the Council didn't yet understand was that they had just lost the one species that might have been able to save them from the darkness that was coming. But they would understand soon enough. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the UFS Indomitable, watching through the viewscreen as the last human evacuation ships jumped to hyperspace. The massive dreadnought hung in the void above New Geneva, humanity's largest colony outside the Sol system. Within hours, the planet would be empty of human presence for the first time in over 2 centuries. "That's the last of them, Admiral," reported Commander Hayes from the navigation station. "Civilian evacuation is complete. All human assets have been withdrawn from Council space as ordered." Elena nodded grimly. 6 weeks had passed since Ambassador Chen delivered humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council. 6 weeks of frantic preparation, of packing up centuries of human achievement and bringing it all home to the 87 star systems that comprised human space. It had been the largest logistical operation in human history, but they had managed it with typical human efficiency. "Any word from the frontier monitoring stations?" Elena asked. "The Devourer fleet has consumed another 4 systems," Hayes replied. "They're moving faster now, Admiral. The latest intelligence suggests they've adapted their feeding process. Instead of stripping entire planets, they're targeting specific resource concentrations. They're learning." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The Devourer fleet wasn't just a mindless swarm of consumers. They were adapting, evolving their tactics based on what they encountered. It made them exponentially more dangerous than anyone in the Council had realized. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth." "It's Admiral Morrison, marked for your eyes only." Elena moved to her private console and accepted the encrypted transmission. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral James Morrison appeared, his weathered face showing the strain of recent weeks. "Elena," he began without preamble, "I've got updates from our deep space monitoring network. The situation is deteriorating faster than our worst projections. The Devourer fleet isn't just consuming random systems anymore. They're following specific patterns, targeting key industrial and population centers. They're systematically dismantling the Council's defensive infrastructure." Elena leaned back in her chair. "How long do the projections give them? At current consumption rates? The outer rim will be completely stripped within 8 months. The mid-rim civilizations will fall within 2 years. After that..." Morrison paused, his expression darkening. "After that, they'll have enough mass and energy to reproduce. Our xenobiology teams estimate that each Devourer ship could spawn dozens of offspring once they reach critical mass." The implications were staggering. Elena had seen the reports on Devourer ships. The smallest ones were 30 kilometers long, while the largest stretched over 200 kilometers. If they could reproduce, the galaxy would face not dozens or hundreds of these monsters, but potentially thousands. "What about Council response?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Morrison's expression grew even grimmer. "They're panicking. The coordinated defense networks we've been advocating for centuries? They're trying to implement them now, but it's too little, too late. The Zephi Confederation lost their entire Third Fleet last week when they tried to establish a forward defensive position. The Veltar are pulling back to protect their core systems. The Ethmorai have gone completely dark. We think they're abandoning physical space entirely and retreating into some kind of dimensional pocket." Elena wasn't surprised. The Council species had spent millennia believing in their own superiority, convinced that their advanced technologies and elegant strategies would always triumph over brute force. They had never prepared for an enemy that simply didn't care about their rules. "And the requests for assistance?" Elena asked. Morrison's laugh was bitter. "Oh, we're getting requests all right. 17 different species have reached out through back channels, asking for technical consultation or strategic advice. The Krixtal hegemony offered to restore humanity's council membership in exchange for military support. The Yuldan Empire went so far as to offer us 3 star systems if we'd help defend their borders. What did you tell them? What Ambassador Chen told them? We're not interested in being anyone's cleanup crew anymore. Morrison paused, then continued more quietly. But, Elena, there's something else you need to know. The intelligence data we collected before withdrawing, it's worse than we let on. Elena felt her heart sink. The Human Intelligence Network was the most comprehensive in the galaxy, built over centuries of being ignored and underestimated. If they had information that was worse than what they'd already shared. The Devourer fleet isn't just consuming matter and energy, Morrison continued. They're consuming information. Genetic patterns, technological blueprints, cultural databases, everything. Our xenoarchaeologists believe they're not just feeding on the galaxy's resources. They're absorbing its knowledge and using it to improve themselves. Elena understood immediately. They're becoming smarter with each system they consume. Exactly. And if they reach the Council's core worlds, with their vast libraries and technological repositories. Morrison didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena stared out at the empty space where New Geneva's orbital facilities had once bustled with activity. Hundreds of thousands of humans had called this system home. Now it was just another piece of territory being abandoned to whatever was coming. Admiral, Commander Hayes called out from across the bridge, "We're receiving another transmission. This one's coming from the Council station." Elena looked at Morrison's hologram. "Are you seeing this?" "We're monitoring all Council communications," Morrison replied. "Let's see what they have to say." Elena nodded to Hayes, who put the transmission on the main screen. The image that appeared was of flowing through cosmic winds, the Veltar Arbiter who had presided over so many sessions where human contributions were dismissed or ignored. The being that appeared on screen was a shadow of its former self. The usual luminescent quality of Veltar's skin had dimmed to a sickly gray, and its tentacles moved with jerky, nervous motions. "Admiral Vasquez," the Arbiter began, its voice lacking its usual musical quality, "I hope this transmission finds you well. I am reaching out on behalf of the Galactic Council to discuss recent developments." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I'm listening, Arbiter." The situation with the Devourer fleet has become more challenging than initially anticipated. The Council has reviewed the intelligence data that humanity provided, and we have concluded that your tactical assessments were more accurate than our initial evaluation suggested. Elena almost smiled at the careful phrasing. Even when admitting error, the Council couldn't bring themselves to simply say they had been wrong. "The Council would like to discuss the possibility of renewed cooperation between our peoples," the Arbiter continued. "We understand that there have been misunderstandings in the past, but surely the current crisis transcends any previous disagreements." "Misunderstandings," Elena repeated flatly. "Is that what we're calling 3 centuries of systematic discrimination?" The Arbiter's tentacles writhed uncomfortably. "Admiral, I understand your frustration, but this is not the time for recriminations. The Devourer fleet has consumed the Kepler 442 system. They have absorbed the Yuldan research station at Proxima Tertius. They are moving toward the core systems, and our projections indicate that current defensive measures will be insufficient to stop them." Elena noticed what the Arbiter hadn't said. Kepler 442 was the system humanity had requested permission to colonize, only to be denied because of its supposed historical significance. Now it was nothing but empty space and scattered atoms. "What exactly are you proposing, Arbiter?" Elena asked. "The Council formally requests that humanity resume its membership and provide military assistance in defending against the Devourer threat. In recognition of past oversights, we are prepared to offer humanity permanent seats on the Military Committee and the Strategic Planning Board." Elena looked at Morrison's hologram. The Fleet Admiral's expression showed exactly what he thought of the offer. Too little, too late, and offered only when they were desperate. "Arbiter," Elena said carefully, you're asking us to send human ships and human lives to defend civilizations that have spent centuries making it clear they consider us inferior. You're asking us to fight alongside military commanders who dismissed our tactical analyses as crude thinking and oversimplification. You're asking us to trust the same leadership that has consistently undervalued human contributions and stolen credit for human innovations. Admiral, please, the Arbiter's voice carried a note of desperation that Elena had never heard from a council member before. We may have made errors in judgment, but surely the survival of galactic civilization outweighs any personal grievances. Elena felt a flash of anger at the casual dismissal of 3 centuries of mistreatment as personal grievances, but she kept her voice level. Arbiter, let me ask you something. When Captain Morrison suggested using converted cargo vessels as ramships against pirate Lord Vashkar's fleet, and the council laughed at the idea, how many ships did you lose before implementing the same strategy? The Arbiter's silence was answer enough. When our medical researchers identified the cure for the living metal plague, and the council rejected their findings for not following proper protocols, how many people died while your scientists took 2 years to reach the same conclusion? Again, silence. When our engineers designed the innovations that made Titan Station possible, and the Zephi claimed credit in the official reports, did you think we would simply forget? Admiral, the Arbiter began, but Elena cut him off. For 300 years, the Council has made it abundantly clear that humanity is tolerated, not valued. That our contributions are useful, but not worthy of recognition. That our lives are expendable in service of causes deemed important by our betters. Elena's voice hardened. You created this situation, Arbiter. You taught us that our worth is measured only by our utility to others. Well, congratulations. The lesson has been learned. The Arbiter's form seemed to shrink on the screen. What would it take? What does humanity require to resume cooperation? Elena looked around her bridge, at the officers who had spent their careers serving in the shadow of alien prejudice. Men and women who had fought bravely, died heroically, and achieved miracles, only to be footnotes in someone else's story. Full council membership with veto power, she said finally. Formal acknowledgement of all human contributions to galactic civilization over the past 3 centuries. Reparations for the human colonies destroyed while council forces were learning experiences. Command authority over integrated fleet operations. And a binding agreement that no human tactical or strategic recommendation will be dismissed without formal review by a joint Human Council committee. The Arbiter's tentacles went completely still. Those terms are extensive. Those terms are what you should have offered 3 centuries ago, Elena replied. Now they're the minimum price for undoing the damage you've done. I will need to consult with the other Arbiters. Of course you will. Elena leaned forward slightly. Arbiter, let me save you some time. Humanity's answer is no. We will not be coming to save you. We will not be sacrificing our people for civilizations that never valued their lives. We will not be solving your problems for you anymore. The Arbiter's form flickered as if the transmission was failing. Admiral, you cannot mean we mean exactly what we say, Elena interrupted. Humanity is done being the galaxy's emergency response team. We're done being the convenient solution to problems created by other people's arrogance. We're done dying for causes that others consider worthy. She stood up, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. The Devourer fleet is your problem now, Arbiter. Deal with it the same way you dealt with every other crisis, without human involvement. Elena cut the transmission before the Arbiter could respond. The bridge fell silent, with only the soft hum of the ship's systems filling the space. Admiral, Commander Hayes said quietly, long-range sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving through the Arcturus sector. The Devourer fleet is accelerating. Elena nodded grimly. The monsters were coming, and, for the first time in galactic history, they would face a crisis without human ingenuity, human sacrifice, and human determination to clean up the mess. It was exactly what the Council had asked for, even if they had never realized it. Set course for Sol, she ordered. It's time to go home and let them handle their own problems for once. As the Indomitable turned away from Council space and jumped to hyperspace, Elena wondered if the galaxy would survive what was coming. But, for the first time in her career, that wasn't her problem to solve. Dr. Maria Santos stood in the observation deck of Luna Station, watching Earth rotate slowly below her. 6 months had passed since humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council, and the consequences were becoming increasingly clear. The blue marble that had given birth to humanity seemed peaceful from this distance, but Maria knew the reality was far more complex. "Doctor," came a voice behind her. Maria turned to see Colonel Thompson approaching with a data pad in his hands and concern written across his face. "The latest reports from the frontier monitoring stations are in. You're going to want to see this." Maria accepted the pad and began scrolling through the information. What she read made her stomach clench. The Devourer fleet had accelerated their consumption pattern beyond all projections. In the past month alone, they had consumed 17 star systems. The outer rim of Council space was effectively gone, reduced to empty void where thriving civilizations had existed for millennia. "The mathematical models are holding true," Thompson continued. "They're not just feeding randomly anymore. They're following the economic and resource flow patterns that connected Council civilizations. They're systematically dismantling the infrastructure that held the galaxy together." Maria continued reading, her scientific mind processing the implications even as her human heart recoiled from the scale of destruction. "Population estimates? Conservative projections suggest over 40 billion sentient beings have been consumed," Thompson replied quietly. "The actual number is probably much higher. The Council stopped releasing casualty reports 3 weeks ago." Maria set down the datapad and looked back at Earth. 40 billion lives. The entire human population was barely 12 billion spread across 87 systems. The Council had just lost the equivalent of 3 entire human civilizations, and the Devourer fleet was accelerating. "Any updates on the Council's defensive efforts?" she asked. Thompson's expression grew grimmer. "It's a complete disaster. The integrated fleet command they're trying to implement is falling apart. The Zephi won't take orders from Veltar commanders. The Krixtal refused to coordinate with the Yildan due to some ancient territorial dispute. The Ethmorai have gone completely isolationist, they're not even responding to communications anymore." Maria wasn't surprised. The Council species had spent so long believing in their individual superiority that they had never learned how to truly work together. Human military doctrine had always emphasized integration and coordination precisely because humanity understood that unity was strength. But the Council had never needed to learn that lesson, and now it was too late. "What about their requests for assistance?" Maria asked. "Getting more desperate by the day," Thompson replied. "Yesterday we received formal petitions from the Veltar Confederacy, the Zephi Harmonium, and the Krixtal Hegemony. They're offering everything from technology transfers to territorial concessions. The Yildan Empire offered to make humanity the senior partner in a new galactic alliance." Maria laughed bitterly. "Senior partner. After 3 centuries of being treated like junior members barely worthy of a seat at the table, now they want to make us senior partners. President Martinez has been fielding calls from ambassadors, military attaches, and even some arbiters directly," Thompson continued. "The pressure is immense. Some Council species are threatening to blame humanity for the extinction of galactic civilization if we don't intervene." "Blame us?" Maria's voice carried a note of incredulity. "They're threatening to blame us for the consequences of their own arrogance?" "It's classic Council thinking," Thompson replied. "They can't accept responsibility for creating this situation through centuries of mismanagement and prejudice, so they're looking for someone else to blame. And, since we're the ones with the knowledge and resources that might be able to help, we make convenient scapegoats." Maria shook her head in amazement. Even facing extinction, the Council couldn't bring themselves to acknowledge their own failures. They had dismissed human warnings, rejected human strategies, and stolen credit for human innovations. Now, when their civilization was crumbling around them, they wanted to blame humanity for not cleaning up their mess. "Doctor," Thompson said more quietly, "there's something else. Something you need to know before the Security Council meeting this afternoon. Maria looked at him expectantly. Our deep space monitoring network has detected something new. The Devourer fleet isn't just consuming Council space anymore. They've started probing human territory. Maria felt her blood run cold. Probing how? Small reconnaissance vessels, no larger than frigates. They're testing our border defenses, mapping our defensive installations, studying our ship movements. Intelligence believes they're gathering data for a potential assault. The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. Humanity had withdrawn from Council space to avoid being dragged into someone else's war, but the enemy they were fleeing had decided that human space was simply the next course on the menu. How long do we have? She asked. Based on their consumption patterns and the resources they've already absorbed, our analysts estimate they could launch a major offensive against human space within 6 to 8 weeks. Maria leaned against the observation window, her mind racing through possibilities. Humanity had always prided itself on being able to solve impossible problems, but this time they faced an enemy that had already consumed a significant portion of galactic civilization. The Devourer ships were larger, more numerous, and more advanced than anything they had ever faced. Have we made any progress on analyzing their vulnerabilities? She asked. Thompson's expression brightened slightly. Actually, yes. Remember the intelligence data we compiled but the Council rejected? Our xenoengineering teams have been working with it for months. They've identified what they believe is a critical flaw in the Devourer energy distribution systems. The gravitometric weapon coordination theory? Exactly. But it's more complex than we initially realized. The Devourers use a quantum entanglement network to distribute energy across their entire fleet. If we could disrupt that network at multiple points simultaneously, it might cause a cascade failure across their entire force structure. Maria's scientific mind immediately began working through the implications. The coordination requirements would be enormous. We'd need dozens of ships positioned at precise points throughout the engagement zone, all firing simultaneously with exact timing. Which is exactly the kind of complex coordination that the Council species have proven incapable of achieving, Thompson replied. But humans have been training for integrated fleet operations for centuries. Our naval doctrine is built around that kind of precise coordination. Maria suddenly understood why the Devourer reconnaissance vessels were focusing on human space. The enemy had absorbed the knowledge of dozens of civilizations, and somewhere in that vast database of stolen information, they had learned something important. They had learned that humanity was different. That humans were the one species that might actually be capable of implementing the kind of coordinated strategy needed to defeat them. They're not just planning to consume human space, Maria realized. They're planning to eliminate us before we can become a threat. That's what intelligence believes, Thompson confirmed. The Devourers have absorbed the military databases of every major Council species. They know about every battle we've ever fought, every strategy we've ever employed, every innovation we've ever created. They understand that humanity represents the greatest potential threat to their expansion. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with Luna Station's climate control. The Devourers weren't mindless consumers. They were strategic thinkers who had analyzed the galaxy's defenders and identified the most dangerous opponent. And they had concluded that humanity, despite being dismissed and undervalued by the Council, was the species most likely to find a way to stop them. Doctor, Thompson said quietly, there's one more thing. This morning we received a transmission from Ambassador Chen. She's still at the Council station, and she says the situation there is deteriorating rapidly. Maria looked at him questioningly. The Council is collapsing. Not just militarily, but politically. The arbiters are blaming each other for the crisis. Some species are abandoning the alliance entirely and retreating to their core systems. Others are demanding that the remaining species sacrifice themselves to buy time for evacuation. The unity that held galactic civilization together for millennia is falling apart. Maria wasn't surprised. Unity built on assumed superiority and mutual condescension was no unity at all. It was just a convenient arrangement that lasted only as long as everyone was winning. What does Ambassador Chun recommend? Maria asked. She thinks we should prepare for refugees. Not military assistance or territorial concessions, but actual refugees. She believes that within weeks, we're going to see entire species fleeing their homeworlds with nothing but the ships they can carry their people in. Maria looked down at Earth again, trying to imagine fleets of alien refugees arriving in human space, begging for sanctuary from an enemy that was already turning its attention toward humanity itself. We can't save them, she said quietly. Even if we wanted to, we don't have the resources to evacuate billions of people from dozens of different species. We barely have enough defensive capability to protect our own worlds. President Martinez is planning to address the planet this evening, Thompson replied. She's going to announce the formation of the Human Defense Coalition and the mobilization of our entire military reserve. Every ship, every weapon, every person who can contribute to our defense. Maria nodded grimly. After 3 centuries of being the galaxy's problem solvers, humanity was finally going to have to focus entirely on solving its own problems. The irony was bitter. Just when they had walked away from everyone else's crises, they were about to face the biggest crisis in human history. Colonel, she said finally, make sure the president understands something when she gives her address tonight. This isn't just about defending human space anymore. We've become the galaxy's last hope, whether we wanted that responsibility or not. Thompson looked at her questioningly. The Devourers have studied us, Maria explained. They know our capabilities, our strategies, our potential. They've concluded that we're the most dangerous threat to their expansion, which means they're going to come for us with everything they have. But it also means that if we can find a way to defeat them, we might be the only species capable of stopping them entirely. So we're back to being the galaxy's cleanup crew? Thompson asked with bitter humor. No, Maria replied. This time we're not doing it for the Council, or for recognition, or for allies who don't respect us. This time we're doing it because if we don't, there won't be any galaxy left to clean up. She picked up the data pad again, scrolling through reports of consumed star systems and evacuated worlds. Somewhere in those numbers was the information they needed to find a weakness, to develop a strategy, to do what humanity had always done, find a way to win against impossible odds. But, this time, they would be doing it alone. As Maria walked toward the shuttle bay that would take her to the Emergency Security Council session, she couldn't help but think about the laughter that had echoed through the council chambers 6 months ago. The sound of beings who believed they were superior to the crude humans who somehow stumbled through space solving problems that their betters couldn't handle. That laughter had died a long time ago, replaced by desperate pleas for help from people who had never valued what they were asking for. Now it was too late for apologies, too late for recognition, too late for the kind of partnership that might have saved them all. Humanity had walked away from the galaxy's table, and now they would face what was coming with only their own strength, their own ingenuity, and their own determination. It was what they had always done best, even when no one was watching. The only question now was whether it would be enough.